Welcome to the Madness and Grace podcast, where we explore the connection between mental health and faith. I'm Dr. Matthew Stanford, neuroscientist, author, and mental health advocate.
And I'm Dr. Madeline Stiers, therapist and trauma researcher. We're so glad you're joining us today. Each week, we have authentic conversations about personal stories, we share professional insights, and explore the meaningful ways faith can influence mental well-being.
Whether you're seeking comfort, understanding, or simply a new perspective, we're here to journey with you. Thanks for tuning in. Now let's dive into today's conversation.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Madness and Grace. This is Dr. Madeline Stiers here with our co-host, Dr. Matthew Stanford.
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us today. We've got a really exciting topic today that we're gonna walk through, and hopefully you'll find it just as interesting as we do. But really, today we're going to be looking at the over-diagnosing of everyday struggles. So what we mean by that is life is challenging. Everyone has had hard points in life, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you're struggling with a serious mental illness or even really mental illness at all. It just, life can be challenging. And what does it look like when we are struggling, but instead of acknowledging the struggle, we try to kind of blame mental illness or put some emphasis on that's maybe not warranted. I think we see this a lot in social media, whether it's diagnosing ourselves or other people. Matt says something that I think is really, really funny all the time is there's this big kind of trend on social media where I dated a narcissist sort of thing. And if anyone's familiar with Matt's research, he does a lot of work on antisocial personality disorder and narcissism, things like that. And he always, what is it that you say? You don't have to be a narcissist.
You don't have to be a narcissist to be an a-hole. So, I get that all the time from, mostly women. A few years ago, I did a presentation here at the Hope and Healing Center at lunchtime, and there were probably 90 people at the presentation, and there were literally only 2 men there. It's all women. And I said, I know why you're all here. I said, you're all here because you either have a brother, a husband, a boyfriend, a father, that you think has narcissistic personality disorder. They all started laughing because that's exactly why they were there. But the reality is, to meet criteria for that disorder is actually quite rare. Less than 1% of the population. But you can be kind of a jerk and not have narcissistic personality disorder. And that's kind of what we're talking about today. Just in a general sense, is that you can have a lot of strong emotions and negative emotions, and be struggling with things like stress and stuff like that, and not meet criteria for a mental illness. And really that's what we'll talk about today, probably, is the idea of, where's that threshold? What's a line that you cross? But there's a lot of negative sides to people over-diagnosing. When we say over-diagnosing, we're talking about self-diagnosing. Like you said, diagnosing yourself or diagnosing others based on kind of incomplete understanding of what you're talking about. And
because I think people think it's very innocent. Like there's this, to say I'm depressed is one thing, whether you've been diagnosed with clinical depression or not. But to say that, to kind of place this kind of extreme diagnosis of narcissism on someone, or to go around saying that you're experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder because you had a challenge in life that you experienced, but wouldn't technically fall under a potentially traumatic experience. I mean, it really does a disservice to people who actually are struggling with these diagnoses and who are working to seek help and care, because then there's this extreme opportunity for misinformation online. And it prevents people who are actually struggling from getting care, and people who are self-diagnosing from actually getting effective care as well for whatever it is that they are struggling with that may not be their own self-diagnosis. So it really becomes, I think this armchair diagnosing is a part of what we're seeing as the stigma around mental illness is decreasing, and people are wanting to have these conversations, and the younger generation is ushering that in. And I think that's wonderful. And we need to be aware of the damage and the harm that it can do, and really be seeking professional help and professional care. And when we're in a place where we might be struggling some.
I mean, I think, we could talk about this from every perspective. There's all kinds of negatives that come out of this. And very, very few positives in relationship to people kind of trying to diagnose themselves or diagnose others. And so, there's no doubt that there's an overprescribing of psychiatric medication. That's been demonstrated. Okay. And that's a problem. And so when people are negative, have a negative view of the mental health care system, they will latch on to a lot of this self-diagnosis. And they say, well, see, look, every little problem, the mental health care system wants to say it's a mental illness. But the reality is that's not true. Only a minority of people in the general population have a mental health problem, a diagnosed mental health problem. You're looking at like just slightly less than 25% of the general population has any type of diagnosed mental health problem. That includes addiction, those are adults. But, only about 5 or 6% of the general population has a serious mental illness, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, something that impairs their function on a daily basis. And what I see is I see people that have some issues in their life that they're struggling with. As you said, life is hard. We all struggle. And they have contextualized that into some kind of a diagnosis that they figured out this is what it is. And that is now their identity. And that's what they live out of now. Or I should say, that's what they don't live out of. I've got X. And so that's why I can't do anything, or I can't finish school. Or they limit themselves. And so, and then what happens is that can get drawn up into some aspect of the mental health care system where that person may actually end up getting medication, probably from a primary care physician. And now they have convinced themselves that they have a problem when they've never received a proper assessment. They've never seen a proper mental health care provider. I see this all the time. And you mentioned it, younger individuals, particularly social media, it presents, in fact, there's really been some good research done more recently that's been published in a number of journals on the mental health content of social media and how mental disorders are described, how the criteria are described, and how really they oversimplify that diagnostic criteria and minimize it, whereas virtually anyone can meet criteria, which isn't real, that isn't legitimate. And I see it primarily for these 4 disorders. You mentioned one, and that's trauma-related disorders. I mean,
can I guess what they are? Is this?
Yeah, you guess.
I haven't that you found, your.
This is both research and what I personally have experienced as what I do. So
narcissism, trauma, autism, ADHD.
Okay, you got 3 out of the 4. Okay, so narcissism, absolutely, I see that, but that's primarily from women diagnosing someone else. But I'm talking about ones who diagnose themselves. And you're right, you've got autism, trauma-related disorders, and ADHD, and the other one is OCD.
OCD, that makes sense.
But if you want to talk about most diagnosed on another person, then you got it spot on, narcissism. Yeah. I mean, if I had a nickel for every time someone walked in my office and said, I'm here because my boyfriend or my husband has narcissistic personality disorder, I would be a wealthy man. But ADHD, OCD, autism spectrum disorder, and trauma-related disorders, primarily PTSD. I see that constantly. People that come in and they say, well, I have ADHD, and that's why I haven't been able to hold a job, or that's why I never finished school, or that's why, well, when were you assessed for ADHD? Oh, I never have been assessed. In fact, I'll give you a perfect example of one that happened when I was still a professor. When I was a professor at a university, I was also on the clinical faculty, so I supervised assessments in the clinic of graduate students that were doing assessments. So I had a young man come into my office who's a junior, pre-med, and he said, well, I would like to get an ADHD assessment. I said, oh, okay. Are you trying to get a new assessment because your old ones got old so that you can get additional services? So to get additional services as a result of having an impairment, you have to have an up-to-date assessment. And so he goes, oh, no. This will be the first time I've been assessed. I go, well, why? Remember, he's a junior at the university. Well, why would you need an assessment? Well, I'm taking organic 2 and I'm failing it. The second organic chemistry, because when you're a pre-med, you have to take first and second. very difficult class.
Challenging course.
Sometimes described as one of the most difficult classes.
Where people drop out.
Right, exactly. It's a filter class. And so I said, really? So he goes, well, I talked to my parents, and they said I need to get an assessment because there must be something wrong with me because I'm failing this. I go, okay, well, did you struggle in high school? Has, this been an ongoing problem? He goes, oh, no, high school was easy. I never studied. Okay, well, what about before this? I mean, did you struggle? Oh, no, never studied. It's the first class I've ever had a problem in. And I said to the young man, I said, ADHD is a neurodevelopmental disorder that you will have had from the time you were born. It will begin to manifest as you have greater and greater academic responsibilities and expectations. You don't catch it like a cold. You don't just all of a sudden be a junior and you have ADHD. He goes, oh, well, there's something wrong. I can't do this class. I said, well, that's a hard class. And so he goes, well, I'm going to be a doctor, though. I have to get through this class. I said, you are wasting your parents' money to get an assessment because I can tell you right now you don't have ADHD. He goes, well, no, they want me to get it. So we assessed him. Absolutely doesn't have ADHD. He's just a normal kid, probably above average bright.
Struggling in open, like
just
every other
struggling in the second organic chemistry. That's just how it is. But in his mind, his lack of performance, poor performance, however you want to say it, had to be the result of a disorder because he's going to be a doctor. And he never thought about the variability in discipline to study, the variability in intellect, things like that. But I see that all the time in all kind of things. I have autism kind of thing. My adult, my child has autism, and that's why they kind of are socially odd. Well, they've ever been assessed for that? Well, no, but it's obvious that they have autism. Well, I mean, that's not something you want a child to have if they cannot have it, and so, but I see this a lot with adults. I don't see it so much with people walk in and say, my kid has that, but I see adults say, oh, I've had it my whole life or this or that. Again, the problem with that, really, there's the two primary problems in my opinion, but there are a lot of other issues, is the idea that a person then their identity becomes the disorder. Mm-hmm. And so they self-limit themselves from being able to either fix whatever the issues are or to function at a normal and higher level. And on the other side, they, as you said, they harm people that really have the disorder because they minimize what those disorders really are. And then other people begin to look at them and go, well, this guy, there's something wrong with this guy. And that means this is just kind of not real.
Yeah. I mean, from a trauma perspective, you get on social media and you see, and here's the thing, I don't want to take away from anyone's experience. Like if you're having challenges in life, you're suffering, get some care, get some support. I don't know if sharing about it on TikTok is the most effective treatment for distress, and people are still doing it. But when I see people, so being a clinician, a licensed mental health care provider who works with women primarily who have experienced trauma, come into my office and share about what's happened to them, it's not a show. Like for me, just thinking about some of the stories, this is where like secondary trauma really becomes real, because it's like, wow, what this person has experienced is so devastating and evil and wicked. They're not sharing this with people in their lives that they're the closest to. They're definitely not on TikTok talking about it. They are struggling to get out of bed and manage their day-to-day life, right? So when we talk about what trauma has become if you ever come to one of my lunch and learns, I'm very clear about what trauma is and what is a diagnosable traumatic experience. You can have challenges and distress in life, and that doesn't mean that you've experienced trauma. You may be having a hard time after it. Absolutely. Get some care, get some talk therapy. There's great options out there. But when we start to say that everything that you've experienced, like you had a hard boss at work, you disliked them, you quit or whatever, there's, interpersonal conflict at work, that is not trauma. Now, if your boss comes in with a gun and tries to kill you, that's trauma.
What?
That's a real trauma. I'm doing extremes, right? There's obviously a spectrum to which this this is applied. But I think what the world is forgetting is ordinary suffering and ordinary discomfort, which is a normal, natural part of the human experience. It stinks. No one likes it. And that is part of living life as a human. You are going to have discomfort. You are going to have stress. You're going to have positive stress, like a wedding, eustress, right? Like these sorts of things. The sadness, grief, illness, all of these things are going to happen to everyone. And that does not lead to a diagnosis of mental illness. It can lead to a period of challenging suffering. And when we jump straight to this kind of extreme diagnosis, we are minimizing people who have experienced these extreme realities. And it's not going to get these people who are struggling with ordinary discomfort and stress the actual care that they need. If you're stressed out about work and you say, I have trauma, and you go see an EMDR therapist, like it's not necessarily going to be the most effective thing for you. When maybe there's some other things going on that you need to be looking at. Maybe this isn't the right job. I mean, like whatever it may be. And I think we've gotten away from this idea of like life can just be challenging. And that doesn't mean that there's some diagnosis that I have to take on and that becomes my identity, right? And I think people are looking for a reason, right? Like, I don't think there's malice in any of this. I think it's people want to be able to say, this is why I'm struggling. And here's the answer. And here's why. And that gives people some resolve through it. But the why can just be that life is challenging sometimes. And you should be experiencing ordinary discomfort and stress.
And we should have a normal level of resiliency where we're able to work through, we know how to cope with things, we have support around us. And that's another one of the problems here is people aren't very resilient anymore, and they don't have coping strategies. They don't have support around them. I mean, it's important to remember that mental health, if you want to call it that, or you want to call it distress, is on a continuum. Okay. And on one end of that continuum, it's just perfect, pristine mental health. Everything is wonderful. Nobody ever has that. And on the other end is a serious mental illness that impairs your ability to function and may even strip you from understanding reality. Okay. And then there's a huge middle. And we all move around on that continuum. And so it may be that you have a day where, or several days where you're really having a lot of stress or negative emotions as a result of something, and you need some support, just friends, family, things like that. There may be a little bit higher level where you need some pastoral care, or maybe even go and see a professional counselor to help, but you don't have a mental illness. You just are struggling. You just need some additional support and people to kind of look in from the outside. But there's a threshold that you have to cross to meet criteria for a mental illness. And really, I mean, we're going to end up simplifying it here, but the fact is that one aspect of those criteria has to do with kind of the chronicity of the disorder or the problem. Mm-hmm. How long has it been there, at this serious level? And then also the intensity of it. Like, is it impairing, most mental health problems by definition impair your ability to function on a daily basis in some way, be that academically, job-wise, relationships, So it's not just like, I'm just really down today, but everything, I think we kind of forget that there's this huge middle. And just because you have to go to a counselor or meet with a pastor or somebody to kind of help support you, that doesn't mean you have a mental illness. And I will tell you the other thing is, just because you go to your general practitioner, and I want everybody to listen to this very carefully, just because you go to your general practitioner and you tell them that you're down or you're anxious or whatever, and they prescribe you medication, that does not mean that you meet criteria for mental illness. In fact, even if you take the medication and you feel better when you took it, that does not mean that you have a mental illness. And so we do a lot of diagnosing by pharmacological intervention, and that's not a good thing. So we really need to step back from that, and recognize that we have hard days, and we getting mental health care is more than just mental illness. And I think a lot of times people think, well, you know what? I take these antidepressants that my general practitioner gave. Yeah, I've been taking them for years. That means I have depression. That doesn't mean you have depression. You might have depression, but we've really in mental health care, because of the lack of insurance covering it most time, we really moved away from comprehensive assessments.
Right.
And a lot of times people are just kind of diagnosed on kind of the fly. And so, why not just diagnose myself? And, so those are significant problems. I think another problem is, you mentioned a little bit, is this identity issue. People that have mental illness desperately struggle not to be identified as their mental illness. They desperately want to not be identified as someone with bipolar disorder. They want to live beyond that. But when I meet people that have self-diagnosed themselves, they often revel in their diagnosis because it helps them kind of justify their shortcomings in some way.
Which is kind of also offensive to people who do have.
It really is.
It really is. They're saying, this has created my shortcomings, because it's innate that you have shortcomings if you have a mental health diagnosis. And that's
right. And so, but these one, I have to say, something like ADHD is super common, with adults. They'll come in and it's always a shortcoming kind of a thing that, well, this is why I haven't been able to X, and so again, just because you can get somebody to give you some psychostimulants, which are a pharmacological treatment for ADHD, does not mean that. I mean, one of the things you have to understand is a psychostimulant is a stimulant. It's like amphetamine. Okay. And people take amphetamines as a performance enhancer. So you can take an amphetamine. I could take an amphetamine. Dr. Stiers could take an amphetamine, and it would improve their performance in a short term. That doesn't mean we have ADHD. And so
another example is grief. We see individuals who someone has died an untimely death, even timely, right? Like older age. And grief is a challenge for a lot of people. And so when they get stuck in that and they're not able to move, their doctor may say, let's talk about a light antidepressant to get you through this bout. That doesn't mean they have major depressive disorder.
Not at all.
It means they're struggling with their grief and their doctors are trying to help them. It's not a long-term anticipated, typically long-term treatment plan. It's a periodic situational.
No, absolutely. I mean, but there is, if you think about it, there are a subgroup of people in the general population that constantly diagnose themselves with all kind of health problems. They go to doctors all the time. It's not surprising that we would see it in mental health. And in mental health, since these are kind of, as people have said, I would never say this, but people say invisible disorders, it's not something that you really see from the outside per se. And so it's a little bit easier for somebody to pick up on that. I also understand the idea of someone wanting to try to better understand why they are where they are and understand their shortcomings. But the problem is that they're not able to move beyond those or improve them or overcome them, because they then get anchored into this diagnosis. And I will also say, and I don't know if you've seen this, I will find people that have self-diagnosed. They have tried to engage the mental health care system and not received a lot of care because they've self-diagnosed. And the mental health care system is saying, well, there's really not anything wrong with you. And so that a lot of times it just causes even more problems for them, because now they want someone to affirm this self-diagnosis, and
they're not receiving.
They're just not receiving. So how do we not have this happen? So first, what I would say is this: don't get your mental health care from social media and the internet. Okay, and so that's a good way to start for anything. Okay, or out of a magazine or off the newspaper. If you are struggling with emotions that you find aversive, okay, usually people aren't like, they don't come in and they don't say, you know what, I'm so happy that there must be something wrong with me because I'm so happy. I'm so relaxed. This can't be normal. That it's always negative emotion. So if you're struggling with some negative emotions, if you're overly stressed out in life, The thing to do is to engage a mental health care provider, but specifically engage that mental health care provider with the idea that I would like to be assessed to determine what's going on. Why am I feeling this way? And so, we don't have to guess in mental health care. We do have assessments that can be done. Unfortunately, a lot of times those aren't covered by insurance. But I will give you kind of a easy way that I've found to help people get a cheaper one, and that is if you have a university in your area, in your community, and that university has a psychology department, even sometimes a counseling department, and they have a clinic where the students get hours and learn. A lot of times they will provide low-cost assessments because students do the assessments supervised by faculty. And that's a great way to get a cheaper assessment, but it gives you an idea of really what might be going on. I think the other thing to do is, instead of just initially engaging a mental health care provider, look around yourself and see if you have a support system that you can sit down and talk with. Do you have friends? Do you have family? Do you have a pastor? Those types of things, or even a support group where you're engaging other individuals, because I think you might find that being able to talk about the problem and hear from other people what their perspective is, it might really help you understand kind of where you are on that continuum. Is this something so extreme that it's really something that would be looked at as mental health problem related, or is this something people deal with on a daily basis? What are your thoughts on that, Maddie?
Another thing to consider is coping. So what do you do? Like if you're doing some self-evaluation to say, like, do I need help? What does that look like? What does your coping process look like? Is it more positive or is it more negative? In the sense of, are you doing things that are actively helping you to feel better and that will long-term be adaptive towards growth? Or are you doing things that are giving short-term relief that may become maladaptive and harmful in the long run, right? So like drinking, drugs, things like that. They are effective in relieving our distress and stress. Short-term, long-term, we see the results of how these cause problems and become maladaptive. So figuring out what it is that you do in moments of high stress or discomfort. Is it isolating? Is it reaching out to people? Is it exercising? Is it shutting down and eating a bunch of cupcakes? Figuring out what it is that you're doing might help you clue into, like, how do I need to adjust some of these things in life? Finding a support system, like Matt said, is a wonderful option. When we think about mental health, we need to not jump straight to what medicine can my doctor prescribe me. While that can be extremely helpful for many people, adjusting other areas of our lives, mental, physical, relational, spiritual, can all really be instrumental in helping us adjust if we're not, on the end of the spectrum of our mental illness is pretty significant and chronic and long term. So all of those things should be taken into account when we're looking at what's my next step? How do I get care? What do I need? And if you are part of a faith community, especially if they have a ministry around like mental illness, support, things like that, asking a trusted person there, like, hey, I'm struggling, I need help. Like, I don't know what I need though. Asking a trusted person around you can help. They can help guide you in the direction of whether it's a group at the church or, hey, we've got a list of therapists we know we can connect you with, or, whatever that may be. Maybe they have a mental health coach in their ministry. Lots of options.
Right.
Don't go straight to TikTok though.
No, that, we say that with physical illness all the time, don't Google it, because it's going to be the most extreme thing. It's the same thing with mental health problems. And I would just, add to what you just said there at the end. I mean, this is where what we talk about here on Madison Grace. I mean, this is a great opportunity for faith communities, because people that are in psychological distress are more likely to engage a clergy before they go to a mental health care provider or physician. And this is a great opportunity for faith communities to have equipped themselves to deal with these problem emotions and levels of distress people are dealing with. People are likely to go talk to somebody there. So the clergy, the ministry staff need to be equipped to be able to recognize when a person has a mental health problem versus when they don't. And then they need to have something in place at that faith community to support people, be that support groups or small groups or pastoral counseling or lay counseling, stuff that allows people that are dealing with kind of normal levels of problems to be able to get the support and care that they need. I mean, this is a fantastic opportunity for faith communities to do that, and people can engage those obviously for no cost. I think that another problem that I would suggest people need to be careful with is when you go in and see your primary care physician, the majority of people do not go in and tell the primary care physician what's wrong with them. So they don't come in and they go, oh, okay, well, I got this all figured out. I do know some do, because I have some friends that are primary care physicians. Some people have Googled it and they go in and they go, this is what's wrong with me. Okay. Well, the primary care physician is more often than not going to not just go, okay, well, let me write you a prescription. They're going to do some testing.
Questions and do their own testing.
Exactly. Sure. But if you go to a mental health care provider and you start throwing around like, well, I'm so depressed, I'm so this, I'm so that, I have ADHD, it can, because again, assessments are not done as often as they should be, it can taint the waters. So my suggestion to you would be this. You're not a mental health care provider, and neither is Google. Okay. So you don't need to go in and tell the mental health care provider what's wrong with you to try to steer it in a particular direction. You just need to go in and tell them what you're feeling, what you're thinking, how is this affecting you? And so I think that's an important thing. You don't need to try to go in and well, I know this is what's wrong with me. Okay. That's going to affect your treatment. And I think the other thing that's really important, and we've said this, but I think this is kind of how we start to wind this thing down. You can be significantly distressed, dealing with overwhelming emotions in your life. The circumstances of your life can really be overwhelming to you at the moment and not be criteria for a mental illness.
Right.
And I think that's important that people realize that. That doesn't mean you don't need assistance. It doesn't even mean that you shouldn't go see a mental health care provider. It just means that you don't have to be pathologized in some sense. That someone has to give you a label to what you're dealing with. You have a difficult life or a difficult circumstance or a difficult job or family problems. That isn't pathology. That's just living. And so, I mean, just before we got on this, Dr. Stiers and I were having a little discussion about our own difficult family issues. And so, the fact is that those can be pretty significant, but they don't have to be pathologized. They also don't have to destroy your life. There are resources and support for you to move you forward. But you don't have to be identified as a disorder to somehow get help.
Life is challenging and can be really hard. And there's no reason to downplay that. The reality is that people struggle and look for care, look for support. Your faith community can be a great starting point. And hopefully that prevents it from growing into something that is worse. We don't want people to continue to experience distress to the point where they are struggling with some serious symptoms. And
I just think that we have to ask ourselves when we're struggling with something, is what's happening to me so outside the norm of people that I fall within that 25% that has a mental illness? Or is it so extreme that I fall within the 6% that has a serious mental illness? But, the answer to that might be, I don't know. So that's when you go talk to somebody. You have to get some, Dr. Stiers and I can sit down with somebody and listen to their story, and we can tell in a very, very quick amount of time if this is going to be something that is a mental illness versus just regular, because we have lots of experience of talking to lots and lots and lots of people that have had these problems and haven't had these problems. But you may not have that kind of experience. And so it's nice to sit down with someone, but that doesn't always have to be a mental health care provider. That might be your pastor. That might be your friend. That might be your neighbor. So I guess what we're saying here is stay off the internet when it comes to mental health. Don't diagnose yourself. You don't go into your primary care physician and say, I got this little belly pain. I know it's cancer. I mean, you don't usually do that. And so you don't want to go in and go, hey, you know what? I find myself a little socially awkward. I know I have autism. And that's pretty extreme. Extreme. And we don't have to go that. You can be socially awkward and not have autism. You can not have a great attention span and not have ADHD. There are a lot of variability in what it is to be a human. And so just remember that. And